Hey guys, Army of Ticks here. And this is the third installment in the How to Carry series. And so we're going to go through, again, a deep technical analysis on how you can carry in a lobby where you're not necessarily the highest OS player. Now this will apply whether you are the highest OS player or not, but many times we aren't. And so it's important for us to carry, not just carry our weight, but exceed that expectation in order to climb in OS. And so this is going to be a great example of how I was able to do it. We're going to go through the technical reasons for how we were able to achieve this, both from a tactical and overall strategic perspective. And then we're also going to discuss just some small micro tips and then how to scale while you're being aggro. So these are all really important skills to learn. Slick like Vic kind of helped me with the scaling while being aggro point. And so I'm going to use a lot of his teaching points to discuss with you guys so you can kind of get the perspective of a pro. And we're going to kind of dive in from here. Just like the first two videos, if you haven't seen them, definitely recommend checking them out. I'll link them in this video. But the first decision that's key is your starting position. So for me, I had 2 games before this where, I don't know, I just fluked. I sucked. So, I wasn't super confident that I was going to be able to take one of these side positions. And generally, these side positions are held by higher OS players because how it works is you're not going to get collapses easy here. And then once you roll this player, you can kind of go in sideways and take the game. And so I didn't really have a whole lot of confidence in my ability to do that. So instead, I focused on trying to fight the battles I know I could win. I wanted to try to align myself in a lane that I was either directly across from or adjacent to lower OS players, so I could abuse them and have an outsized impact on the game. In this instance, I just so happened to be adjacent to him, but was able to use that opportunity to abuse these 2 players quite a bit, and we walked away top player in this game, which, you know, considering how high of a OS lobby it is pretty good. I mean, I'm like a poop player down here, so so I think this will be a really good example to help a lot of you up your game and carry a lobby regardless of where you're at in OS. So I chose this spot for that reason. Originally, I was actually going to choose air so I could do the same thing, but to sort of bomb these outside players. And I didn't get that spot, so this was my second. So let's go ahead and dive in, and I'm going to show you everything from the micro decisions, the unit comp decisions, but also more importantly, the scaling while aggro. And this is actually a really important point that I'm going to go over in depth here. Slick like Vic taught me this recently and really kind of hammered it home. So I'm going to share that pro level advice with you guys so that you have the ability to kind of get that directly as I had gotten it from him. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to see if I could do player cam this time. So staying zoomed out is always important. You want to be able to see what's going on in your lane and what's going on in the other lanes. In this instance, we see the wind is 15. I have this solar queued up, but I actually switched to wind because metal for metal or metal for E, I'm going to get way better value off these winds. And so I kind of shifted that to that until the wind dropped down. Eventually, I just got to the point where I just made the solar because I wanted consistent E. But taking advantage of that early wind boost early is important. And in order to do that, to not disrupt your queue, you just hold the space bar and place a new windmill. It'll put it in the front of the queue, and you can still continue with the rest of your queue, so you don't have to reconfigure it all. Okay. So we have I think it's, let's see, yeah, 2 cons. 7 ticks, 1 con, and we have a centurion. So I'll go ahead and stop here and kind of walk you through why this particular unit comp. So 2 cons, I'm going to take 1 con backwards, cap these 2 mexes, and build wind here, here, and like a bunch of other places back here. And I'm going to have him do that incrementally as a single con, so it's not too much of an issue when it comes to my metal spend. So that'll just be some incremental low-level scaling in the back, but I want to cap these 2 mexes and get that E scaling in the back. So it's safe, my base is decentralized, and I'm able to get a con out safely before I have any scouting units. Beyond that, the second con is going to be to boost the lab. I want to get my commander up early This is a very laney map, especially this spot. So there's a lot of terrain that kind of creates these bottlenecks and choke points that commanders really excel in, because a commander uses a D gun, which essentially eliminates anything other than a commander on contact. There's a lot of opportunities for them to hide in these areas. They can have, they can build LLTs up here, or they can repair units, or they can kind of hide here from radar cloaked. They won't show up on radar if they're hidden from radar. So if your opponent has a radar here, it's going to have a shadow here, and your commander can hide there, and you can degun things. So I want to get him up early, get a good front, secure this metal, and so I want to get some BP on the lab pretty quickly. And I also want to use him to build enough E to support my economy before I leave. So I'm going to use the con, the second con, to boost the lab to get the ticks out so I can harass while he builds the E. Once he's done, he moves out, takes the mexes, throws radar down, and moves forward. So that's kind of the thought process behind it. Now, once I get that con out, we're moving to Centurion. You could do 1 or 2 Centurions generally. Centurion is a really good precursor to a rocket bot push. It prevents you from getting pushed by pawns and ticks. It also can put a lot of pressure on a commander because their range just slightly exceeds a commander's D-gun and laser range. So if you're really good with micro, you can push a lot back. And the other thing is, too, because of how laney this map is, it's going to be hard. Once I have a Centurion in this lane, it's going to be really hard for anybody to get ticks past it. The range is like generally this, and so you'd really have to slide it past. And if I have radar here, I'll see them coming and can shift over as required to block the entire lane, which then forces the opponent somewhere else, likely where my commander is or I have other units. So that's sort of the reason for that. You generally want to get either pawns, ticks, or Centurion out before rocket bots. That's really important because rocket bots are great for poking efficiently, but they will get rolled over by pretty much anything that's not an LLT standing still. And so it's really important for you to keep in mind when you come up with your early build order. Don't start with rocket bots. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and try to fast forward through this. Okay, we're at wind is 1, so we built a couple more solars. I have enough E where I'm comfortable, and so I move out, take this mex, build a radar. Building the radar up there does 2 things. Let me kind of show you real quick. So building radar gives you awesome coverage everywhere, and it prevents your radar from getting killed by ticks and pawns. They can't hit that. And so I'll be able to keep that radar much safer that way. It also gives me better coverage. If I put the radar here, you can see there's a big shadow there. If I put it there, shadow, shadow, this is the minimum amount of shadows. So you'll see the most, and you'll have to produce less units to respond to a raid because you'll see them coming sooner. So that's sort of the logic behind that. I'm going to go ahead and show you what we're doing here. So now our objective is to harass the opponent. I want to get ticks in their backline, chew away their mexes. Oh, you know what? One more thing here, actually. This is really important, too. So if you want to be a high-level player, this is something you just have to do. So it's something important to keep in mind that when you have a lab far back like this, your distance to the front is significant. And so when you're producing units from back here, and early on you have to, but when you're producing units back here later on, you've essentially got metal wasted walking from here to here. DPS not being used, unit not being used. And so one of the main things you want to do, especially on longer maps, is to build a forward lab. So you see after, I think I might have changed my build order. I can't remember. But one of the cons goes up. I'm going to be putting 2 con turrets down in range of these mexes so I can upgrade them easily later on when I go T2. And I'm going to go ahead and put a bot lab or a vehicle lab down depending on what I'm feeling. And that forward lab will shorten the distance between me and the front line. One of the hardest parts about beating an opponent is the defender's advantage. The distance that your units have to travel before they hit their base and the distance they have to travel before they hit their units. The less distance, the more units you can get into that conflict, and the bigger advantage you have. I mean, more units is OP, right? So, you know, if I'm making a breakthrough, a lot of times what high-level players will do is they'll make great use of radars, and when they see it coming, they'll produce the units if they have to. Otherwise, you know, they'll be focusing on what their other priorities are. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Forward lab is extremely important. You pretty much always want to send a con forward, especially in these longer maps that are 8v8. There may be some exceptions, but generally it's a great idea. And then that'll get you T2 units out there faster too, and pretty much anything else you might need throughout the course of the game, like resbots. So, okay, let's go. Actually, let's watch what we're doing with these ticks. Okay. We're managing these groups of ticks independently. I want to eat away the APM of my opponent. And so right now, this brown player has his units running all over the place to try to catch me instead of actually raiding me. So by keeping them away from me, I'm able to focus more on putting pressure on them. Now I see, because of this radar, these ticks coming. I use this con as bait to get him into my Centurion. And luckily, I'm able to save the con. And that Centurion placement was on that side because I saw them coming this way. If I hadn't known, it would have been a 50-50. It could have gone this way. It could have gone this way. That's why early radar is extremely important. Okay, now we're switching to rocket bots. Now, you're going to see in this game, oh, you know what, I'll get to that next, why ticks are important with rocket bots, but here's another example of how ticks are great in an early scenario. So let's just pause right here. So this player, Neza, he's a great player. He chose to go with pawns to raid. Pawns are a lot slower, and metal for metal, ticks generally do better against them, especially if you can get surround. You just need more of them, obviously. And so I made the choice specifically to create this formation because I wanted to get surround damage. So I made this concave formation. I didn't know if he was going to go this way or if he was going to go this way. As soon as I see that he's going this way, I go for the surround. And so, you know, for 147 metal, we're able to stop 162 metal. Now, there is another pawn in here that's helping a little bit, but I'm able to move a lot faster as a result, too. So you'll see how this kind of works here in a second. Getting the surround damage is really important. It increases the overall damage you can inflict on the enemy. Okay. So keeping ticks with your resbots is a special advantage that Armada has over Core, because ticks have a range of a line of sight range of, I think it's like 500, 600, which far exceeds the range of a rocket bot, 475. Nothing else has a range that line of sight that far. And so, like, if I'm a player and I'm fighting T1 with rocket bots, I want to be efficient. The most inefficient part of rocket bots is that they miss a lot, because early on in the game, radar dots are not precise. So that's a radar dot. The blitz is over here. And so sight is OP. If I can see them, I can shoot accurately. If I don't, I'm going to probably miss about 50 to 60% of the time. I forget what it is. And so your rocket bots become much more efficient when you incorporate ticks in with them. Now, I keep mine on a separate control group of 3, and I just kind of keep them in line with the rocket bots or slightly behind them to keep them safe, and the Centurion close by as well, because ticks are easy to kill. I want to keep them back, and because they have so much extra LOS, you know, it's not going to be a problem if I have them behind the rocket bots. I can still see 475 in distance. So that's a really important way to abuse your opponent with arms specifically. Core does not have an equivalent. Grunts, I think, have an LOS of 500, if I remember correctly. And actually, I might be wrong. So pawns are 429. Let's see. Who has grunts? 500, yeah. So grunts, you can kind of do it, but they got to be like in line with the rocket bots. But that's one of the advantages at T1 bots that ARM has over core. So let's just go ahead and go player view, and you can see how this plays out. So now I can see much further than my opponent. And at this point, I know that I'm playing a lower OS player. I'm making the LLT because I don't have 2 or 3 Centurions up top, and I need to make sure that I am able to prevent myself from getting rushed. And I'm using my Centurion to push Neza back and dodge his rockets to help my player catch up. Right now, he's pretty significantly behind on units. Now, I'm making LLTs here because I see this player is focused on this lane. Oops. He's focused on this lane. And we're both susceptible to any sort of blitz wraparound by this player. So normally I'd probably make a wall here with LLTs, but because he's lower OS and I saw that he kept kind of running back and forth, I decided that I'd probably be safe with like 2 or 3. I think I end up building another one. Because I have a lab here, I can respond to it with pawns. So I decided not to do that. And then continue to use my commander to repair my units. So that was kind of the decision there. Blitzes are really dangerous on the front. You have to watch for a rush. Any good player that has blitzes is not using blitzes as a medium tank. They're going to use blitzes as a raiding unit, and so you just need to be prepared to get raided and rushed when they have blitzes. Okay, you see we still have pretty perfect vision. Here's the commander, ready to do a D-gun if we get rushed. He's behind this canyon here. And so let's take a look. Actually, let's do a quick comparison. So I'm noticing, and I'm not really sure why, he does not have any ticks with him. So let's see what he sees. Haha, perfect example. Okay, so let's do a quick analysis. So he sees radar dots. That's all that he can shoot at. Those radar dots are actually not even close, generally, to where these units are. Now, serendipitously, you still may hit some things, but your accuracy is going to be way lower. We have perfect vision of him. And why is that? Because this player has a tick here, which can see all the way through, and I think mine got killed. I'm going to show you actually how you overcome that, whether you're core or arm, in a second. But those ticks give perfect vision. This is a pro-level tactic that players like Autopilot use to get a huge advantage and snowball their rocket bots early. You need that accuracy, and you can only get that with perfect vision this early in the game before you have pinpointers. Okay. So we're using resbots to repair, comm to repair. Now I'm noticing I don't have vision. And so in a moment, you're going to see how we fix that in a cheeky, sort of cheesy way. Okay, here we go. So we're building 2 walls and a camera behind it. Now that gives me perfect vision of pretty much everything around. I'll show you. At this point, there's like nothing we can't see on this front. They don't have that kind of vision. And So they're at a pretty significant disadvantage. And, you know, this guy's kind of pissed because he's getting 2v1'd and this guy's not doing a whole lot, but he's a 3-chef. So, you know, what do you expect? So I hope that definitely is going to help your game quite a bit. Just getting that accuracy with resbots or with rocket bots is huge. Now we're switching back to ticks because we're ready to raid. We see that this player red has retreated. And then now we're seeing an opportunity to take these Janus out. Janus do a lot of friendly fire to themselves. So if you can get a tick close to a Janus, chances are another Janus will destroy it. And we just got 2 of them right there, helping this player out, preventing us from getting pushed. And we're just going to continue making ticks on repeat as we scale our E. See, we have metal and E in the bank, so we want to increase our build power, make an extra storage, make some converters, and then once we're done with all that, continue scaling wind. So this is a rec field you want to take. So I need to eliminate these units and take this 1.7K because this is like 80% of a T2 lab. This is going to be really important. So I want to push this player off this rec field and then take it with my commander or my res bots. Okay, it's at this point the T1 push is over. Once I got hit there with those blitzes, I wanted to replenish my rocket bots to continue the push. But I see that there's Pork ahead, and Neza ran back a little while ago, and I did not see him. And so for me, with all this extra metal, it seemed like a waste to continue making T1 units, although I do continue making ticks because they're great for raiding. But at this point, we've made the decision we're going to switch to T2 lab. I have metal in the bank, and I have a lot of E built up. So right now the wind's at a very low speed, and I'm at 400 E a second. You generally want about 500 E a second if you're going T2. You can get away with less depending on what you're trying to do, but that is going to be your benchmark. So I know at about a 6 wind speed, I'm definitely at 500 or more E a second. So for me, the time is kind of go T2. And so this is what we're doing here.
Commander destroyed.
We have some Comrex over here, so we want to pressure those, try to get that additional metal. Again, using the ticks to get vision. Now this was a mistake. I'll pause right here. I thought because my res bots were here when I issued this command that they would just go this way, but instead they went the worst way possible, so they got wiped out. That prompted me to then say, okay, I have to bring my comm over here. I was going to kind of perch him here before this, but that didn't really work out. And so you want to kind of use your commander as a last resort. Res bots eat it quicker, but they're also less of a risk. You don't want to compound like this person did, where now you have another comm in the mix. As soon as I see him trapped, I'm backing up so I don't get stuck in it. I'm using my ticks to draw them all away, pressure the base, and to take control of these wrecks. Okay, so like most of the time, you do not want to make sprinters generally. In this instance, the thought process was, I need something quick to kind of stifle this. It's not really much of a threat. I'm not really worried about it, especially with the commander here. But the sprinters, the purpose of those was because I felt like I really had a good raiding opportunity through here. And generally, we did. This commander goes down in like 1 second. And so we have the opportunity to jump through. Sprinters are actually really good like fiends for doing that. And so that was kind of the thought process behind why make sprinters at this stage, just so that, you know, that decision is clear. And sprinters have their place. I mean, they're generally like a meme unit, but they do have their place.
Commander destroyed.
So I made a mistake and took my eye off my commander. Now, in this instance, I'm generally safe because I can go behind here and cloak and degun. For whatever reason, I'm cloaked here, but it just didn't work. I don't know why. I stood still and did everything. I don't know what the delay was there. Maybe that's just something I'm missing. But, yeah, so generally, yeah, you'd want to cloak there and then just degun when you need to. If they can't see you, they can't shoot you. Okay, now the early units were important to try to have an impact on the game before the enemy went T2. It didn't really work out beyond just kind of stopping what was a push from orange. And generally, in a situation like this early on, you'd get a lot more value from hounds, but my intention in that particular instance was to raid, so that's kind of why I made that sort of awkward decision. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Hounds definitely, in retrospect, would have been better. And we end up going hounds and Fat Boy in a little bit, but at this point, things are pretty safe. We want to get a con out and get our mexes upgraded. So I'm going to make a couple of butlers. I'm going to put BP, including con turrets, on these mexes. You saw me queue up all of my mexes with this con. All I did was select it and hit the letter N on my keyboard to move to the next building in the queue, so that I'm not going to be delayed by this T2 unit to lay a blueprint. Once this was about done, I didn't need the build power anymore. That's when you go ahead and hit the letter N, and that's what will move things along. It'll get your mexes up quicker, and at the end of the day, this is a very compoundy game. And so the earlier you get your mexes up and the more advantage you have, that compounds over time and becomes actually a really outsized impact overall in your ability to either carry or hold your lane. So it's just something important to remember.
Commander destroyed.
So the reason we chose Fat Boy here is because if you look at the game, let's look at the state of the game real quick. So what do I see? I actually, by this point, didn't notice this lane was dead. But I see a front that's held pretty well. And at this point, I just need to get my mexes up and start scaling so that I can build up enough stopping power to push through and get to the back. And so at this point, what I did was I created a Fat Boy because they do damage very efficiently and they can be protected with very little. They create a lot of standoff distance, and denying all of these mexes is what's going to give us an economic advantage. So just having that unit with a radar bot and a jammer guarded by maybe like a couple of welders is enough to kind of keep these two lanes at bay for a while, and you'll see how that plays out. Let's go ahead and fast forward.
Commander destroyed.
Got him with ticks. And then we go ahead and eat that metal real quick with res bots because that gives you a pretty significant advantage. Okay, so one of the key topics of this video here is scaling while being aggro. So being aggressive and scaling. So this is a lesson that Slick Like Vic taught me, and he's one of the really good players on the pro team TM. And so right now, wind is low, so it's not actually as bad as it seems, but I am on low E, which means I cannot scale or spend my metal. I need to spend my metal to produce the units and upgrade my economy vis-a-vis mexes and later on fusions and APHIS in order to do that. So that's the main purpose of metal at this stage in the game, the main purpose of E at this stage in the game is to spend your metal. So right now I'm in a situation where I am E poor. I should not have this slider down. This is a mistake that I made early on when I needed some extra metal, and I forgot to put it back. This should be all the way up here so I can bank when the wind is high. And so I made a mistake I didn't notice until later. But the reason that I'm making these is because metal for metal, they're about as efficient as a fusion. And if you make a couple of these at a time right before you need them, and I say before because they cost E, then you'll be able to keep this E bar at a reasonable level, spending your metal consistently without having to stop unit production or any other significant building to build something like, let's just say, a fusion. So a fusion is going to be significantly more expensive. Am I missing something? Here we go. Fusion is going to be 3,300 metal. I can bust one of these out with 350 metal. And so if metal for metal, they're about as efficient as a fusion. What you're doing is, so if I have a fusion, I'm going to make a fusion, and that's sort of how my E scales. If I'm using incremental A solars, it's kind of like this. And so what that does is it lets me to continue scaling units and all other things throughout this period of time. For the fusion, where I'm at with my economy, I'm pretty much going to have to stop everything I'm doing until that fusion is done. There are times where that's a good idea. This instance, wanting to apply pressure, you're going to want to do the opposite, which is incremental scaling. I think at this point in the game, I see what's going on over here too. And I realize that like we've got to really make kind of a push over here and have an impact on the game. So we're making a basic solar first because wind, or I don't have enough E to really kind of push these out.
Commander
Go
destroyed.
ahead. And then that allows us to get the A solars up, and now the E is fixed. And at this point, what we're doing is we're creating space. And I'm putting together an idea in my head about what I want to do to push these guys. So I see that he's making hounds. Hounds aren't really going to be able to do anything against ticks and fat boy. So hounds are good for raiding at range. But they're not really going to do a whole lot against the fat boy and especially other hounds, so they prevent themselves from getting ganged up on. So that's kind of why I'm not too worried about these hounds, and I'm thinking about how I can apply pressure into the middle lane against the two opponents that are there.
Commander destroyed.
So I have the fat boy on friendly fire, so I don't, or on hold fire, so I don't friendly fire myself. You don't have to do that. It's just a choice that I make. It just requires a little bit more APM to shoot the fat boy. I don't always have it, so sometimes it's a good choice, sometimes it's not. Again, we see E getting low, and so we are going to add some more A solars here in a second. There we go. Okay, so we see an AGO here. That's got huge potential to change the state of the game. This guy's just sort of huddled up in the back, not really doing a whole lot. And so, frankly, I don't really see him as much of a threat. He doesn't have a lot of mexes, and so I'm pretty confident. I'm far ahead of him. And so that's kind of why I'm not pushing him too much, even though he's red. I'm shifting over to orange because there's a huge upset potential here. If we can take this center out, we've pretty much cleared the way to move in and pressure yellow, who's still pressuring this side. Spody did a great job of stopping him, and I think, frankly, this guy used the wrong unit choices to raid through the sides. But yeah, ultimately, that's sort of the reason why we're choosing to shift lanes. And shifting lanes does a lot of things, like surprising your opponent, changing sort of the dynamic of the game overall, and so that you're not thinking two-dimensionally. You definitely want to try to shift in where other players are weak. Okay, I see the comm is low. We're going to select fire the comm. He'll pretty much take everything else out.
Commander
There you go.
destroyed. Commander destroyed.
Okay, so it's time to make more BP. Once your metal is high like that, you want to make a lot more build power. Finally, I remembered to slide my slider up. And then, yeah, we're just going to continue to eat the metal in the rec fields that we just created. So it's, contesting that metal, making the decision to protect it long enough to get that metal out of it is really important. Those metal rec fields really decide games. And blitzes here for spam was a choice to counter pawns. They have similar DPS. They're just a lot stronger. They're pretty much just as fast. They might be a little bit faster. And blitz spam is actually pretty powerful in situations like this. It's a great raiding unit. I'm seeing Jags too. Blitzes can counter Jags in enough numbers, whereas something like pawns or ticks have a much harder time doing that. So having that unit with like a little extra health sometimes can help. If they have enough Jags or Welders in this instance and you can't beat them with what you have for T2, you could also switch to medium tanks if you could afford it. Now also you'll see these Shuris are kind of stopping this push. And so, if you have a bot lab, there are two things you could do here. So you'll see I made some AA bots here. So we have a queue of about 6 more. There's a couple on the field already. I'm going to plant those AA bots here, but they're slow is the problem. So the other thing you could do is you can make Platypus. Platypus have really good AA, plus they're also fast. They're about as fast as a Fiend. I think they're actually a little bit faster if I remember correctly. And they also are a great raiding unit. So they have pretty solid DPS. And so you're going to have something that's essentially like a grunt with AA, is a little bit faster, if I remember correctly, and has similar DPS. So, for their value, regardless of whether or not you need them in an amphibious situation, they're great because they could take out Shuris, they could accompany the rest of the units, and they can also raid the backline.
Commander destroyed.
Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and fast forward through this because the game's almost over. Okay, and the platypus have pretty much shut down a good portion of these Shuris, and we've made it into the back. At this point, I want to shut down this orange player, this air player. I'm going to send these blitzes over to there, and the game is pretty much over.
Battle ended.
So, for being low, if you're showing up on multiple awards here, that's good. You know, and so you always want to check your stats. So in this instance, top damage, really good damage efficiency, high metal produced, which is pretty good. Not the highest, but still pretty high. Good. These are all good things. You want to, as a player, have an outsized impact relative to your OS, and that's generally how you're going to climb in OS. So if you're an 18 OS and you perform and have the same general skill level as like a 30 OS, you're going to be finding that you win more games than you lose, and you'll climb in OS that way. And so, you want to be a high value player that has an outsized impact on the game, and that's the overall objective. So just to recap, a couple of key things that we did here to gain an advantage. Number one, using those micro techniques in the beginning, ticks accompanying rocket bots to get that perfect vision, that little camera wall trick to get perfect vision so that you can maximize the efficiency you have in T1. I think at T1, if I remember, I had like 250%. And so that's important. Abusing placement delta. So in this instance, we had a low OS lane opponent here. So use that opportunity to attack the higher OS players and gain an advantage. We also talked about scaling while producing units. So we produced just as much E as we needed to, and we did that in the form of A solars. Now remember, A solars cost E, so as we were getting our first couple up, we produced some solars because they have 0 E cost to them. And so we did that so that we could raise our E incrementally to spend our metal. At the time, primarily, we were spending our metal on two things: lab and mexes. So we were going down the line and upgrading all of our mexes. Once we upgraded our mexes, we came back and built 3 fusions. Now, the fusions, I usually circle the con back to the base. Sometimes I'll automatically just queue up the fusions. The problem is later on you forget, and if it's a bad timing in the game tempo, making a fusion while you're trying to pump a bunch of units is terrible. So, I'll make the fusions once I have a second to do it. And in this instance, we had time to do it, and I queued them up independently. The other thing that we did that was really important, we focused on quality unit compositions. So welders pretty much counter any spam. In this instance, I wanted a hardier spam to accompany the ticks, and so I chose blitzes. You could just as easily choose something else if the situation is appropriate, but generally if you're raiding, you always want spam units accompanying your big chunky units. Otherwise you are vulnerable to D-guns, and it's also much more expensive to have an impact on the game. Think of your high value units as a way to punch through a line, and all of these cheaper raiding units, sprinters, fiends, in this instance platypus, are the way to capitalize on that value. You don't want to raid with snipers. You can raid with hounds, but I don't know, they're okay. But, you're definitely not going to raid with welders. They're too slow. And so you want to do these other things to capitalize on that value and to create an opening in their back line from where you punch through the front line with those T2 units. That's why Marauders, for example, in the T3 are very good to punch through an area real quick, but they're best at fighting windmills and aphises. They're not something you use in a head-on assault against like T2 Starlights or anything like that. And so that's sort of the synopsis here of how to have an outsized impact on the game. We were able to scale while we were producing units because we sensed that unit production was going to be the thing that actually turned the course of the game, and we weren't in for a long-haul game of who can scale the most APHIS. That's not always the case, but in this instance, it was the correct read. So I hope this video was useful. If you have any feedback or if you'd like to see a different topic, hit the like button, leave a comment. Always open to kind of hearing what you guys are having trouble with and see if I can put a good video together. All of the feedback that I have is generally from pro players, either directly or indirectly. So what I would also encourage you to do is reach out to a pro player and ask if they'll do like a replay review with you. Just make sure you're like at least 30 OS. They don't want to be, you know, doing like tutorial level stuff generally. But yeah, I hope this is useful, and we'll see you on the next video.